Greetings and welcome to Helicopter Market Trends Live, hosted by AviAsset. I'm Emmanuel Dupuy, and today's roundtable is all about global aerial firefighting, a critical component in combating wildfires across the globe. Nations and corporations from the United States, Australia, Greece, and Brazil have developed specialized aerial firefighting programs to protect lives, property, ecosystems. The subject is vast. In the following panels, we will explore the latest developments in technology, operation, financing, and the global collaboration efforts that define the modern landscape of aerial firefighting. Moderators on different continents will introduce their speakers. Larry Alexandre, President of United Rotorcraft, Russel Christopher at ITE. But first, to get us going, I'm delighted to introduce, joining from Chile, a man that absolutely needs no introduction, one of the most personable VIPs in our industry, Marcelo Rajchman, Corporate CEO, Ecocopter. Hey, Marcelo.
Thank you very much for the invite. I'm very glad to be here.
Excellent. And to join Marcelo, I'm delighted to introduce Frederic Goig, advisor to several aerial firefighting companies, and Dan Reese, President, International Wildfire Consulting Group. Hello, gentlemen. Good day to you.
Good day.
Excellent. Marcelo, can you help us get going here and perhaps give us a sort of general opinion on the aerial firefighting market?
Yes, I think it's a great opportunity to talk about this. As I always say, Ecocopter is involved in the mining, energy, oil and gas, many different sectors. I really don't know what is going to happen in this world with all these segments, but unfortunately, firefighting is the only section that I know that each year is growing and growing. So as an example, only last year, or last firefighting season in Chile, we had 130 aircraft operating during the summer, 80% of them from abroad, so come from always from the North Hemisphere, but US, Canada, Europe. We receive aircraft from Greece, from Spain, from the United States, and each year it's more complicated, the logistic, the shipping, the costs. So there's a lot of things to discuss together about that. It's impressive what's going on. In my last years of the industry, it's always Chile, the firefighting market in South America, but right now we can find helicopters in Brazil, Argentina. Now they are calling from Bolivia. So it's a problem that is expanding around the rest of the continent.
That's truly a global market. Dan, can you give us your sort of general introduction on the market?
Well, I come from a little bit of a different, unique position where I'm not really an operator. I'm no longer an end user. However, I'm fortunate to be able to be in contact with a lot of people and advocate for aerial firefighting globally. And there are challenges here, specifically when we talk about the super heavies. Everyone knows that there's problems with parts and service and that type of thing. The U.S. has engaged contracts where they're stable right now as far as what people can do and what they can get. Operators are happy, I think, from what I talked to, for 50%, which is different than what's abroad, but there's other challenges abroad for operators here. The U.S. government has engaged their new contracts and the torps. They were under protest for the Type 1s, the super heavies, but I think that is subsiding. But there's still a challenge in the market with the existing aircraft for parts, I think, and maintenance, just as it is across the globe. So that's kind of, the market in the U.S. They're not looking for, new technologies. They just are looking for what they can get. The CH-47Ds coming online on the market have doubled what's available here in the U.S. The U.S. has Sikorsky, so the UH-60 platform is being used more and more and more, and you see a lot of the agencies going to those, like CAL FIRE and the local government agencies that used to run the Type 2 Huey type aircraft. So we're seeing more Type 1s, I would say, being utilized in the U.S.
Okay, and delve into more specific subjects, but for now, Fred, can you just give us your sort of market outlook?
Yeah, it's as said by Marcelo, it's definitely a growing market. This is for sure. It's a market which in Europe is in a need and starting to restructure itself from the end users, the customers, which are all public entities, with players there are very few which are only firefighting. I've got a couple in mind, mostly in Spain, talking about the Pegasus. We'll talk with Carlos later on, with Plisa. And we've got the same kind of problem that the ones are seen by Dan, is the asset availability. With another constraint and another layer of problems in Europe is that it's many countries. It's very much Mediterranean exposed and developed. We'll see with that even in this speech that it goes east and it goes north. We've got Diniz from Agrarflug. We've got Aram from Sweden. So we see that it's moving, but each country have some proper doctrine in firefighting. So the fleets are hardly mutualized, and rescue, which is the entity at the European level, which is playing the role of mutualization of assets, is not enough funded to provide a proper dedicated fleet. So we may have some interesting future in terms of organization, in terms of development, and I hope that this conversation will be helpful for everybody.
Yeah, so the market is global, but you're still dealing with all the individual jurisdictions separately. And Marcelo, how do you see the balance of the fleet worldwide?
That's interesting, because I think it's changing. First, we have the Russian helicopters that are somehow out of the market. For example, the Camo was an aircraft that was really useful, at least in Chile. So now the Super Pumas and lately the Black Hawks are taking that position. And in Chile, the Black Hawk is allowed to operate. It's still restricted category, but it's allowed. Countries like Brazil, for example, is not able to bring Black Hawks. And because of the density or the power of the fires, my clients are start asking more and more for heavy lifters. For example, we were the first to bring the first Skytrain. Now we have 2 Skytrains. There are a couple of Chinook. There are 5 or 6 Super Pumas, 2 Black Hawks operating in Chile, and less B3s, for example, or Koalas that we used to see a lot of them. So somehow the seasons are getting longer, but are getting more powerful too. So the strategy of the combat of the fires is changing too. And the problem, I think Fred thought about that early, is that it's not easy to find heavy lifters in the market. Neither Skycranes, for example, the Skycranes that I bring to Chile, they came from Reese. It's a 90-day contract, and they are 45 days in the boat for mobilization, or 45 days to demobilization. And last year, I paid only for one way, $1.1 million each way of the ship for 2 helicopters. So I think it's impossible to continue like that. Something must change. The rates are increasing. I think are between 20 and 30% from last summer to this one. So that's a good news for the industry. But what I'm seeing is more medium and heavy lifter instead of light helicopters. That's the feeling that I have from the market.
Do you think so? Do you think it's inevitable that helicopters will continue to go back and forth regionally? I mean,
that's another great question. I think something will change. For example, the last tenders in Chile from the government that they used to be for 3 or 4 months. Many of them are 6-month contract, and that make it impossible to be on time for the North Hemisphere. So on one side, for the government will say, I'm giving like better contracts, but for the operators, especially from the North Hemisphere, was a really bad news, and that is happening every time more and more. So I don't have the solution, because I think we don't have enough aircraft to be in both hemispheres separately. But yes, it's happening, and I don't have the answer.
Yeah, there are two things here. First, indeed, there is a problem of availability of aircraft. There is also a problem in Europe of type of aircraft, because the Black Hawk is starting to move, and it's starting to move out of Slovakia, and starting to move in Central Europe, tried in Italy, tried in Cyprus, but it's not EASA recognized yet. Chinook is the same story. There is one, but it's not recognized. So it depends also on the doctrine of the countries. Some countries will tell you, I need a heavy, but I need to transport 16 brigades, firefighter brigades, where in these aircraft, same as the Kamov, you cannot. Okay, so this is another issue, and one point in when you have a heavy aircraft at the cost we all know, if you have a 6 months period and another 6 months period and you cannot do both, you've got some difficulties financially to sustain the aircraft if you are not able to do 4 and 4 or 4 and 5, or so it's create another issue.
Dan, what's your view?
Well, it's delicate. They've got the multi-award task order contracts here in the U.S., which makes it a little more feasible for contractors to know that they've got something. They're now, a 1-year contract guarantee with 4 options that they can answer to. And people in the U.S., when you talk about moving about, the U.S. is a little bit more isolated than, say, the European Union, or even getting down to South America. So there's always the cost and the risk for these operators to go down there. And contracts, now this is not experience myself. I've flown in Bolivia. My background was with Global Supertanker, which is a fixed wing, contract, but it's still operating internationally with the same constraints that the helicopter operators are dealing with. But, comfort and being away from home, the increased cost of logistics, that type of thing are all playing into what's going on. There's risk in the contracts, and the contracts in North America are a bit different than abroad. Now, this is not Dan speaking from experience. This is Dan speaking with talking to other operators, and I have the unique position of being able to talk because I'm not going to be penalized. But the contracts outside the United States are viewed more as punitive versus collaborative. So if an operator goes abroad, there are some very, very specific contract language in there that sometimes makes it difficult for those operators. And it is a risk. Fire is always a risk. Sometimes we have these bad fires, and sometimes, the weather, comes in and it's a different year and you've got nothing. So the exclusive use contracts really are a big deal in knowing what you have and what you're going to get. That's kind of, a simple perspective for those wanting to stay, in the United States. I don't know that we have a huge problem, but there is a problem with the super heavies, as already discussed, with the parts and income and being able to keep those aircraft going. So, if I've got a crane and I go to Chile and all of a sudden I can't get a part, then that puts me at jeopardy of losing the entire contract. So those are challenges that I, hear from the operators that I speak to.
Do 12-month sort of multi-mission contracts exist in Latin America, Marcelo, and in Europe, Fred?
Right.
No, and it's not
very
a thing that's getting discussed.
No, not very much. There are some geographies, such as if you take, for example, Brazil. In the different geographies of Brazil, you could eventually use an aircraft in firefighting almost during all the year. But when you are in Europe, you are on May, September, October, and when you are in Chile, and I speak under your control, you are December, March.
Yeah. In Brazil, they sign contract the government is signing contract for 1 year all around, okay, for 7 aircraft. But then in Chile, it's from mid-December to mid-March. And for example, I'm involved in many different business units, mine, energy, telecommunications. I don't have enough demand to allocate so many aircraft in different projects. So that's the problem. That's why, for example, aircraft like, for example, the Black Hawk that now is somehow cheap, is the only, when I do the business case, is the only one that I know that I can operate, for example, 4 months, keep it in an hangar, sleeping, and then use it again the next season. But you need like very cheap aircraft that can approach that kind of ideas, crazy ideas. But if not, you have to continue doing the counter season or somehow educate the clients to start using the aircraft for another kind of missions. For example, Arauco, the private forestry companies in Chile, has a lot of problem with the safety. So they can use, for example, the aircraft for safety missions, or I don't know. They have to look for another kind of mission to use the aircraft all year round, because if not, it's going to be very tough to find.
Marcelo, you bring up a good point. Those missions on the shoulders of the fire season, that used to carry these operators, right? We had logging and we had infrastructure, and a lot of that would keep these operators going. But that isn't not the case, I would say, in the United States anymore. Finding that shoulder work to survive is a big deal. So when we talk about fires and we talk about contracting, I don't know. If we look to the future and what we can do, I really feel like, I hate to say this, but subsidies. We don't see $1 million operators, right? We see operators barely hanging on and sometimes going bankrupt. It's not a lucrative industry. It's an industry that allows people, I think, to survive. Are you a large operator? And then if you're a large operator, can you get a contract? Are you a small operator where you're nimble and can move? And have the people to do what you need to do? There's a variance there. We could sit here and talk all day about the contracting, utilization, effectiveness, and that's another challenge even here in the United States when we talk about utilization and proper use and employment of the aircraft. Are we being effective for our constituents, and are we working together to make that happen? Meaning, if I'm throwing water in the middle of nowhere and it's not being really supported, are we being effective? And even here in the United States, we see that, whether it's with fixed wing or rotor wing. I think rotor wing working closer with the people and utilization is a big deal, but still not without its challenges on the shoulders to be able to operate. And when we talk about other industries like farming and farms, governments subsidize those people. So we have a farmer that's producing, and then all of a sudden it's a bad year. There's subsidies available. There's nothing out there for the aerial firefighting community in the in the rotor wing world or the fixed wing world. If you have a bad season or something goes wrong, or you have an aircraft that goes down and you can't get a part for it, people are on the hook.
A firefighting service should be seen as a form of insurance for governments, right?
Absolutely.
Dan, let's move on to tech. Coulson, I think back in the day, sort of developed. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think they were one of the first operators to fly night vision,
NVG operation.
Yeah, NVG operation. How do you see the trends, the sort of tech trends going in the next few years?
Well, when you talk about specifically North America, there's not a push from the federal agencies to be able to use and go under NVG. That's more of a local government, state issue. Southern California is where it originated and kind of where it's staying. it adds to the cost of the program when we talk about, the equipment and the training and the use and the utilization, and that all has to be weighed against the risk of utilization and what they're doing. So, tech on that side, I don't see it. I do see tech on the other side impacting the helicopter industry, whether it's autonomous use of helicopters. There's Rain here in the U.S. where they're trying to have an autonomous Black Hawk. So there is technology advancing and going in. We see a big uptick of the smaller, drones, but not the Type 1s yet. And those are not really being funded appropriately, even at the federal level, to take a bite where they need to grow the technology. So acceptance and growing the technology are the two challenges. And we talk about drone use. Let's just talk about that and how that impacts our world, right? Whether it's fixed wing or helicopter, is if there's a drone in the space and it's not controlled and we don't know about it, you don't want to fly. They're going to shut the air program down. So how do we engage technologies to be able to notify crewed aircraft that there's non-crewed aircraft nearby to stay safe? Well, that technology exists today, but there's still resistance to change to incorporate and use and grow that technology, right? There's technology that any operator can put on their aircraft and tell them that there's an RID flashing drone, let's say, in the area, and same with crewed aircraft. The U.S. had a terrible accident where two crewed helicopters intersected and impacted, and unfortunately one copter was completely lost and destroyed, as well as the crew. So if there was other technologies available that weren't, say, TCAS, but could let a pilot know, look, you're on an intersect course, take these instructions and to evade. That even today, just due to the risk and the cost and the total integration of the entire system, it's like pushing a boulder uphill. So there is tech coming, and it will impact. It's just how quickly are we going to embrace it within the industry and grow it?
I think there is another subject on technology, is to work on the efficiency of the flights and the water or retardant drop. We are at the time of AI. Everybody's talking about that. Everybody is using it. And we don't have, and I checked that also with Dan, we don't have in any geography something which is robust, deployed, which is just evaluating what is going to be the behavior of the fire. Where is that to be attacked? Where should we evacuate? So there is not enough technology used in managing the fire attack.
I know, Fred, if I can say, what I see in Chile, I didn't see even in Cal Fire, mainly because I'm dealing more than the government with the private forestry companies. That's the difference between Chile and the rest of the world. The budget comes from the companies, so they are more business oriented. And I saw how they use the AI to predict the fires, like in the first 10 seconds when they start, and it's incredible what they are building. So if someone wants, I can invite any of you in Chile to see what they are using in Arauco and CMP Semininco, that are the two biggest private companies here. That is amazing. And they are, answering Emmanuel too, is they are start asking a lot, especially night firefighting. And as Dan said, and you too, Fred, it's not as easy as it looked like. It's not only the aircraft, it's the training, it's the equipment. But for the first time, now I have, for example, an open tender from one company, and they're asking for 3 medium heavy aircraft, for example, Super Puma, Black Hawk, etc. One of them must have the capability of night firefighting. They know that the regulation is not yet there, but they are still in the tender, are like asking for one of those 3 aircraft that came with this night firefighting capabilities, like as a must. So, and they that's first thing, Emmanuel. Like night firefighting is like is in a hype. I think I'm not sure if it's like from the operational perspective. It's more for the press sometimes because they want to show that they are like 24/7 with the aircraft in the air, and because the fixed costs are very expensive. As I said, if you bring for 90 days a sky crane, they want to use it like 24/7. And then I have another company, a startup of Ecocopter called EcoDrones, that we operate drones in the spraying industry. And they are start asking a lot of drones for surveillance with thermal cameras during the night to identify where are the hotspots to send the aircraft very early the next morning. So I'm seeing a lot of drones around too, at least in South America, especially in Chile.
Marcelo, when we talk about, and Emmanuel, you asked the question about tech, a lot of that has to do with the contracting methodology as well, because anymore, everybody's tightening their belts, right? Companies are tightening their belts, and when we tighten our belts in aviation, bad things happen. We look at lowest price technically acceptable, LPTA type contracts. Those kinds of contracts inhibit innovation because the operators don't have the spare change to be able to put that new tech on board their aircraft. So if I'm going to try and get a contract with Marcelo in Chile, why am I going to put all this, super tech on board and try and get it if I'm not going to get a contract, or that's the only place I'm going to go to get it if I'm competing with LPTA type contracts? So, Fred brought up a great point, and Marcelo dove right into it with that technology. There are companies out there, Techno Silva and Flame Mapper and those kinds of companies that have built these amazing programs to learn through AI. Then there's a lot of base data that needs to be fed into these solutions to be able to talk about how resistant a fire is to control. I've been exposed to programs where it will even show you, look, you're not going to be effective with aircraft here in this chute, in this space. So if you think you want to stop the fire there, think again, because you're just going to be wasting time. You need to go a ridge over or 2 ridges over. But if I, as an operator, employ that, I need to have it. But is the government going to reimburse me to have it on my aircraft? That's the question, and very difficult now with the LPTA type contracting methodology.
Well, look what has been said by Marcelo. When he's requested to bring technology, to bring something new, it's requested by private customers.
Correct.
And most of the other customers and are public entities, and we are all struggling with the budget. When you see the Spanish national budget did not move over the last 3 years, or something like that. So they are trying to rethink their approach, and meanwhile, in the same budget envelope, they are asking for less assets in order to compensate a bit, knowing that at the end of the day, they will certainly need extra assets in emergency to cope with the problem.
What about and just one last point on tech, and then we'll move on to the final conversation subject. But what about water evaporation? Is that a myth, or is that real? I mean, I've heard that water loads getting released on fires could evaporate up to 40% before the load gets released. Is that real, or is it an exaggeration?
I don't know if it's the evaporative process. They're talking about that 40%. Is that in the drop? I mean, there's a lot of subjectivity to a statement like that where you lose 40%. Undoubtedly, hands down, and this is from my own experience, both I can't say as an operator. When I was with the agencies and I was, air operations over a fire, or I had, the chemical program under my purview, and we were doing R&D on utilization of chemicals being dropped from helicopters, hands down, there is a marked difference in effectiveness between water enhancers being used with helicopters versus straight water. And I would advocate to you, this is not coming from me. This is coming from the pilots who were engaged in the testing. It's about a 5 or 7 to 1 ratio. difference. Meaning, if I'm going to drop a water enhancer, and for those on the call that don't really realize, the difference, water enhancers enhance the effectiveness of water. Once the water's gone, it's not a retardant, right? So think of it as a SpongeBob, where it holds the water together in a more confined space. So when you drop it, you're not going to get the big drift where you see a big line from the air, but most of it evaporates. You're going to see a very defined line because the water holds together. It's being dropped from the ship and lands where the pilot puts it. But when we talk to pilots that have experienced that kind of technology from them, for every one trip they do with an enhanced drop, it's 5 to 7 with straight water. And that's using an existing technology that we don't see and we're not using a lot of, but it is being used. But hands down, when we talk about efficiency and wanting to do something, that technology is unbelievable. Not employed, though, much. Shamefully.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, let's move on. Marcelo, consolidation in the market. Is that inevitable in the next couple of years?
I think I believe that. Okay. Again, there's a huge tender right now online in Chile for, I think, 15 aircraft. 40 different helicopter operators approach to the tender. 40. So that's not healthy for the industry at all. And I think that we need more strength in the operations from the operators to be stronger to compensate our fleet around the world. Okay. So I think we should see some consolidation. If you ask me, what the problem is that I'm not seeing the right leaders or the visionaries who will lead this process. But from the operational perspective or from the demand and the supply, I feel we should see some consolidation. I would love to see colleagues around to support that view and work together on that purpose.
Totally agree. Totally agree. There is a clear need on consolidation of the market, particularly in Europe, because the market is you don't have any one big player, as you could have a Conair, you could have a Colson. You don't have that, so you need one big player. As Dan was saying, when you've got some size, you can eventually absorb some risks. The second thing is that we did not talk very much about is the balanced fleet. To build a solution for firefighting, you need some fixed wing, you need some rotary wing, you need some heavies, you need some lights, you need some scoopers, you need some retardant. So you need to propose a global solution, and it's not because you have 20 B3s that you are the guy, And last thing is that this market is starting to interest and attract investment and looks, and we will discuss after. We've got a panel run by Russ. We'll see what he says. But even in terms of equity, that the firefighters, aerial firefighters, are protecting more CO2 emission, CO2, than they are destroying CO2 being in the aviation segment. So there is also a green aspect to it, and it is definitely a growing market, and we see that the markets are growing. And we also anticipate some strong move in the fixed wing segment, where the replacement of the CL415 from being the 515 is still a bit pushed to the right from the first order from rescue. There are some strong initiatives in Europe as alternatives. So there will be interesting things on the market in terms of investment, in terms of operator consolidation, and in terms of fleet adaptation.
Fred, you bring up a good point with the balanced fleet piece, and that does impact the rotor wing world as well for control and initial attack of fires. So although, maybe we have more fires starting in areas that weren't fire prone now, and some areas where we're fire prone, we have the same fires, but we have the inverse problem where they're resistant to control. So they get bigger. So the bigger our fire gets, the more resources and assets it's going to eat up. And the longer it goes, the longer those aircraft are committed to that incident where they cannot go for initial attack to control other incidents. And that's one of the reasons it's so important to have a balanced fleet. When those helicopters get to the fire, they're pretty much set there for utilization for multi-mission to help those commanders do what they need to do on that fire. And there's a lot of varied missions. With the air tankers and the scoopers, that's a different beast, but they can move quickly to try and keep things. But if we continue to allow these fires to expand and gobble up the resources in the helicopters, then they don't become available for other things. And there's a lot to unpack what we're talking about here. And one of the things that happened in the United States is we came up with the United Aero Firefighters Association. As an independent operator myself, when I had Supertanker, and I would go to Washington, D.C. to advocate for the aerial firefighting world, and it didn't do me any good to advocate just for Supertanker because I was at the behest of the industry. So it was an industry stab. We could not make headway. And I don't know how it works in South America, and I don't know how it works in Europe, but I do know how it works in the United States, and that's through politicians and Washington, D.C. And so, in standing up the United Aero Firefighters Association, we've had helicopter operators, every aerial asset operator in the United States. I'm not saying, I'll say category, not every operator is there, but the categories are all represented with one big unified voice in Washington, D.C. And if there was any way to do that in South America or Europe, I highly advise it, because that's where policies and things are addressed and changed to meet the needs of the operators. You can't do it alone.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you very much for getting us going, Marcelo, Fred, Dan. Thank you for your insights. Really appreciate it, for getting this roundtable going. To present the next panel, I'm delighted to introduce Larry Alexandre, president of United Rotorcraft, originally a designer, manufacturer, and installer of medical interiors that's grown to serve other industries, and amidst this growth has become one of the most experienced outfitters of firefighting aircraft in the world. Hey, Larry, it's an honor to have you.
It's a privilege to be part of this panel, and frankly, what an amazing first panel. It's going to be hard to follow. Great discussion, so many topics. I was, jumping up and down in my seat wanting to participate. But great input from everybody.
Well, thank you, and thanks for spearheading this next panel. I'll let you introduce your speakers. Go ahead.
Yeah, so today I'll be joined by Emile Grobbelaar. Emile is the CEO of Kishugu Aviation in South Africa. Welcome, Emile. As well as Carlos Abrego Aguilar, Chief Strategy Officer and Fleet Director for Pegasus Aero Group, based out of Spain today. Although I know you work across the globe. So, guys, thanks for joining me for this panel. Again, like I said, so many good things were just talked about here, and we'll probably loop back on some of those. But as we just heard, and given the audience that is extremely international, I mean, this is truly a global phenomenon, right? Some of the points that were raised, right? There's aircraft availability issues. There's regulatory issues. There's definitely fire seasons that are lasting much longer than they used to. There's what I would call emerging fire markets as well, where people didn't necessarily have that big of a threat and now are facing it. But given that increasing severity and duration of fire seasons globally and that capacity gap, obviously international cross-border cooperation is becoming a must, right? The ability to mobilize or demobilize and remobilize across borders is very important. But one of the topics that we all know in this environment, which is a highly regulated environment for very good reasons, but to which extent is this becoming kind of a hurdle or a challenge for operators out there that want to fight fires cross border or internationally? What do you believe should change? First of all, what are you facing? And secondly, what do you think should change in terms of regulations to make international cooperation less challenging? And maybe Emile, we'll start with you if that's okay.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Larry, and the honor of participating in this distinguished discussion. Thank you very much for that. I first thought we should perhaps consider what the benefits may be of improved cross-border collaboration. And I think offhand one can think of a variety. There's probably significant economic drivers to improve cross-border capability and capacity, and that is all about increased resource utilization across fire seasons, over different geographies, as well as different environments, and a variety of other benefits. Just ensures longer term utilization and more productive utilization of the resources in an industry that we've heard from the previous panel and in other platforms and forums that is constrained in terms of available resources, both actual aircraft, helicopters, but also engineering capacity and pilot capacity are all very constrained in the industry. So I think that would probably be the most significant benefit. In terms of the challenges, I'd say, and all of us as operators are constantly facing these, and most importantly, or first to mind, is probably regulatory differences between different operating environments and different territories. Then in certain instances, but I think it is actually a lot better than what it was maybe a few years ago, is communication barriers in certain instances with language differences, etc. Logistical complexities, also notably in areas where there's been logistical challenges, even just moving parts around in the normal course of business. Cross-border operation could be more complex and more costly. Then there's issues to consider like standardization and data sharing and perhaps juridical issues. Certain agencies that have responsibility for certain areas, and I think those are all potential matters that should be considered and that are potentially creating challenges for improved cross-border operations.
Carlos?
Well, I can't agree more. And first of all, again, also, thank you. I do agree, Larry. It was a great first part of the panel. Let's hope we are on the same level. There were great ideas just shared in the previous, and some of them probably are worth to be further developed here. But in particular, with regards to let's say globalization of these, I can't agree more with Emile. It's basically regulation. I think the language barriers and communications, it's a very practical but real challenge. I mean, you've got to have, we are operating as Pegasus, we're operating in Spain, and the pilot in command has to be fluent in Spanish because the people down there doesn't speak English. We operate in Reese, and we got to go on board, we got to have an interpreter, which is able to speak with ground. And this creates a lot. It is not only economically inefficient, it's creating real safety problems. The people we got on board, normally, I mean, the requirements for the people you got, backwards on your left side, just translating, he's not a professional pilot, same level of the pilot in command, obviously, most of the times. So it is an accepted mitigation measure from the contracting party, in this case, the states, let's say. They create real challenges. I mean, it's a problem. And so it's a real challenge, because at the end of the day, the only solution you got to that is that operations could be fully carried out in English. What about the people down there in the ground? They don't speak English. How do we solve that? It is a problem that goes beyond, much farther than our own control. That's a big barrier. And in terms of regulation, I always set the same headline. I mean, Europe, for instance, doesn't exist as a single body. I mean, in Europe, if you want to fight fires in Spain, you've got a regulation this thick which is a royal decree that imposes certain FTLs, training requirements, requisites for accountable managers, operations manager, etc., etc., etc. Language, it is required language that make absolutely impossible for any other operator. There is nobody fighting fires in Spain who's not Spanish. It doesn't make any sense. Not even a French. We've got a branch in Italy. In Italy, they say that Italian and Spanish are quite similar. No, you can't fight fires in Spain if you haven't got a COE, a special AOC granted by the Spanish Civil Aviation Authority. And furthermore, it's fun enough, you cannot wet lease aircraft from outside if you can't demonstrate. I mean, we're struggling now in Spain because we've got to justify why we bring helicopters on Charlie registration, helicopters that are owned by my group, Chilean registration. So we've got some helicopters, a number of helicopters and planes registered in Chile because we do operate in Chile. But when we want to bring these helicopters back to Spain to operate in Spain, of course, we need to ask for the dry lease in. And we are challenged for that by the Civil Aviation Authority of Spain. And they say, hey, can't you find any EASA registered aircraft to operate? I say, what? I mean, first of all, it's my aircraft. I have decided to register it there. And second, why should I be justifying? Because the dry lease, at least in Spain, the dry lease in, it's a kind of a instrument graciously granted by the Civil Aviation Authority to allow on a temporal basis operate foreign aircraft in absence of aircraft that are in our regulatory system, in this case EASA, which is absolutely amazing in 2025. I mean, I can't bring a November registered aircraft without a justification. If there is a 212 in Europe, which is available, I should get this one. I can't get. It's a kind of this world is changing so much. I mean, globalization has been challenged and threat, and this is a real threat for our market and for our industry. The step back, the pullback in globalization is going to play against us very much, and we will be just restricted to, as our fellow panelists were mentioning in the previous segment, we will just be asked to get our helicopters flying 3 months, 90 days in the fire season and be paid proportionally to the use they do, 3 months out of 12. And what do I do the rest of the time? That's your problem. No, listen, if you can't let me go back and forth anywhere, and I can't have any other use. Spain is a very small country. We can't have businesses like in the United States, in Australia, in Brazil. You've got lifting, you've got heli-skiing. We have nothing to do with helicopters in Spain out of fighting fires or search and rescue. So I'm not very optimistic in this side. I'm really sorry for the cold shower at this point. But yeah, we should better wake up. And last but not least, just push and support as much as possible association, vertical aviation industry, European Helicopter Association, all together, just trying to make the society, the politicians aware about what we do, what can we do, how important we are for the society, and let them, listen to what we need or what we can do.
Well, thanks for that, both of you. I mean, clearly, it's hard to see. I appreciate the cold shower because I think step one to fixing something is facing the brutal reality, right? And this is the brutal reality. We heard some of it with the previous panel. It's definitely hard to see how we quickly fill that gap between what the actual need is on the market, right? I mean, we understand the severity of the problem with the reality of the regulation, the economic reality as well. We heard the previous panel talk about how it's really hard to make a living as a firefighting operation if you don't have side activities. And you said it yourself, you have to buy an asset. People want the latest and greatest technology, but are not necessarily willing to pay for it. How do you bridge that gap? Dan previously was talking about, I think it's UEFA in the U.S. I mean, what do you think? What do you think is the beginning of a solution in Europe or other regions of the world? Emile or Carlos?
I'll jump in. Thanks, Larry. Maybe Carlos's voice still a bit hoarse from that discussion earlier. Larry, I think what we are doing today is perhaps a good example of a very first step in trying to move forward on this matter and create better collaboration. So it has to start with I think communicating, and all of that could lead to strategies like developing standardized procedures, enhancing communication. Want to take up the cue from Dan in the previous discussion as well. A lot of the decision makers and lawmakers and the politicians needs to be advocated on what these challenges are and try to move this cause forward as well, as we are trying to make changes to other causes, because that's where it will actually be accomplished is only if there's buy-in from that level, also for collaboration and what is needed. I think fostering international agreements. So just as a starting point, establishing formal agreements. Perhaps we could consider joint training and also sharing resources within our individual environments on a local level. So guys from Spain coming over to South Africa and participating in our season within our operations, those are options, and learn from each other in that. And then leveraging technology. There's maybe areas of collaboration where we could learn from each other, and perhaps technology can be a driver of closer collaboration in future and actually making us work closer together as the world became a lot smaller place through man on the street technologies like the social media, etc. Perhaps it could be an industry drive as well, to make the world a smaller place where there's improved collaboration amongst all of us in the different jurisdictions. So those are the few items that come to mind. And maybe one item that I'm just thinking of now that could also add to that is perhaps the source of funding, and also picking up from the previous panel, where climate change, that is a global challenge and a global phenomenon that could potentially be funded from global sources. Borders should not be recognized in that instance, because if we're all honest with each other, fires don't recognize borders, do they? Except perhaps if that border is defined by the ocean or a big mass of water. Otherwise, fires don't recognize those borders. And I think the way that we operate should also not be limited by those borders.
That's a great way to say that. Yeah, you're right. Fires do not know borders. Great point. Carlos, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got an initial problem, the starting point, which is the lack of awareness about what we do. I mean, we were in the previous segment of the panel. Our fellow colleagues were talking about consolidation in terms of operators, the number of operators offering services. But there is another problem, which is consolidation on the offering side. I mean, we've got too many customers asking for small portions of service. In Spain, we've got 17 autonomous. Spain is a very small country, you all know, but we've got 17 autonomous regions. Plus the federal government, every one of them thinking about their own system, making their own contracting process, and they even operations cross borders inside Spain have problems. They need to authorize, and so they sent a big number. I mean, one thing that would work for sure. I don't know how far. What can be done from our side to improve that would be definitely to consolidation in the offer. So that a customer like Europe, RescueE is supposed to be the agency created by the European Union to support global operations in Europe. Do you know what we do normally? I'm just simplifying a bit. I don't want them to be, unfair. But basically, what they do is to feed back the states to pay for the state operations. The helicopters from the military and the army fighting the fires. No money from RescueE at the end of the day comes down to the stream for civil operators. So at the end of the day, it's money from the states coming back to the states, and the operators are kind of aside. But and furthermore, RescueE is not contracting; it's not centralizing any kind of contracting. They're contracting more media, more aircraft that are supposed to be, reinforcing big crises. Now we've got the big problem in Greece. Okay, let's go everybody to Greece. We're right. 10 days later, when the fire is that big, it's useless to continue fighting the fire, as Dan Reese was saying before. And you're right, late. So there's no consolidation in the customers' budgets in one side, and we've got 1,000 of customers just, spreading euros and dollars to 1,000 of operators competing among us. So cross-border operations cannot exist in this context. So I would definitely think that, first of all, improving awareness about what we do, it's only visible, in my opinion, through consolidation, single voices. Once again, Vertical Aviation International, European Helicopter Association, strong multinational organizations that can have a single voice in front of the society, the regulators, everybody else, just to facilitate these cross-border operations, unified regulation. We know what should be done. Everything that Emile and I and you, Larry, know, it's simplified regulation, it's blah, 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 it's harmonizing all this, but who is going to be challenging EASA to do that? It's going to be Pegasus as an operator, it's going to be Bristow, it's going to be, who is going to do? The size of the firefighter operators in Europe is extremely small. We've got, in Europe, we've got Aviation, which is a big player, you've got Pegasus, on my company, which is a €100 million revenues company. It's a small company, my company. And we are one of the biggest players in Europe, probably one of the biggest in Spain, of course. Nobody's going to listen to us in EASA. Nobody. Our problems to operate in Italy and back are meaningless to the authorities, the clients or the regulators. So awareness, we need to increase awareness in our industry. This is it.
Yeah, all those great points. Clearly, we've all been in this market for a while. 10, 15 years ago, firefighting was kind of an afterthought for the OEMs, for the lessors, and here we are today. We have James going to talk to us in a little bit. There's now interest in this market because there's a capacity gap. There's more flight hours. The seasons are longer, and while the industry, us, truly understand what the needs are, I think the customers, often those government agencies, lack the depth of expertise that's really needed to truly identify what they need for their situation. And to your point, 17 autonomous regions in Spain, all of them with an idea and their own SME to define what they need, doesn't help with what we just talked about, which is trying to find a way to properly compensate operators for the work they do, and support the technology advancements that the previous panel was talking about. So we've talked about the tenders. What do you think should be the main areas of focus in those tenders? Again, you have, as I mentioned before, regions that are really new to this firefighting scene and are now having to go fight fires with aerial assets. What do you think is lacking today in those tenders that you would recommend that be front and center?
Well, if I might just jump in, just two things. The first one is to change the budget limited approach. Right? You can't just decide as a customer if you're not knowledgeable. If you are not knowledgeable, if you're not an expert, if you're not an operator, if you're an end user, and you have no enough advice, and you can't demonstrate somebody which is knowledgeable has proposed you with a solution, a design, and a budget, you just need to listen openly to the market. You can't say, I need this type of helicopter because I like it. I have decided heavy, mid, light. I want a number of helicopters. Or instead of having 10 B3s, why do not consolidate my budget into a single Super Puma? Because you have not the knowledge. This is the first thing. I don't know in the Spanish or Italian, Greek, Portuguese, Chilean administration, even in the private companies, none of them have the knowledge which is comparable in terms of use of aerial means to fight fires, which is comparable to operators. So first thing to do, forget about capping the budget and listen to the proposals. First thing to say. Second is definitely move from, I think it was done mentioning the LPTA model. Forget about the LPTA model. It's not LPTA because this is not dropping water and moving people. We're not just a commodity service. There's safety implied. I mean, there's a lot of value added service there. I'm not talking about, putting night vision goggles or putting, advanced communications, only dropping water into the fire and doing that effectively. It's not just procurement of pencils. I mean, you're not buying pencils. You're not buying liters of water. You're buying a complex service with a lot of implications in terms of safety. So LPTA just doesn't work. This is best value, and as you're not knowledgeable enough to determine the value, just listen the market. Listen the market, see what the prices are, and see if you can afford it or not. That is all. So this would be my piece of advice to clients. Well, this is my piece of advice to clients. Unfortunately, I have not succeeded so far in the last 20 years. I continue pushing.
Emile?
Yeah, I fully agree with Carlos. I mean, that is the bottom line, is the two matters as he mentioned. If I had to just venture and maybe add a little bit to that, an educated client base that considers aerial firefighting as part of an overall integrated fire management approach with preventative activities and the whole series of activities that forms an overall integrated fire management approach would be the real solution to the problem. And not just nitpicking and trying to buy a commodity or to commoditize a single service in a very big basket and in a very big toolbox that could potentially be available. I think that could move us and the industry to a real solution.
Great. So that leads me to my last question, which is, go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah, I think it's on the customer side. Also, the problem, and I'm very sorry to be so straightforward, sometimes maybe unfair, but this lack of knowledge in most of the customers does not allow them to design multi-services. For instance, combining search and rescue with firefighting is not that difficult, is it? I mean, a helicopter configured for search and rescue, I'm not talking about offshore search and rescue, in the 20 miles inshore. No, I'm just talking about mountain rescue. You need basically a firefighting helicopter with a hoist. This is what you can do. And this is a 12-month operation because everybody gets lost in the mountain in January and February. But what do we do? Listen, no, search and rescue is not my duty. This is my fellow colleague minister duty. So he's got his budget. I've got mine. I go for firefighting. You go for search and rescue. Your search and rescue helicopter is not equipped with a cargo hooks. They can't drop water if I need it. But mine is not equipped with a hoist. So you will not say, and these are members of the same governmental entity. So once again, if they were more and more willing to listen to the industry and accept suggestions and design, they will be keen to accept how to design effectively the aerial firefighting systems. Things would be much more efficient, better, etc., etc. It's like going to any kind of shop, to a butcher's shop, and just listen to the butcher. What kind of meat he offers? I want this stuff at this price. Listen, I haven't got. Okay, you go look for it. No, that's too expensive. Okay, no, that's it. So.
But so it's a very good point. I think we are seeing around Europe as well. Ministries of civil protection or disaster relief, not just firefighting, right? So that's definitely a concept I think the industry needs to push hard on. But it also drives different decisions in terms of assets, right? The type of assets that you need to be able to perform multiple missions and equipment. But this leads to my final question, which is an area of intense debate around the globe, with frankly very different approaches and different answers. Which is, should the firefighting or civil protection or disaster relief should these assets be operated by the government? Should these assets be operated by commercial operators? You see countries where there is no governmental agency that supports it. Canada, I would say, is an example. Then you see, in California, we have a mix of public agencies like Cal Fire, LA County, Orange County, and yet many other commercial operators that work together. We'd love to hear your views on is there a better approach than others, or is it really dependent on the maturity and the expertise of those government agencies? Emile, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Larry. I must maybe just declare that our main operation is in a developing economy at the southern tip of Africa that pales against the rest of the industry and the rest of the world and the type of resources that are available and are potentially deployed in the market. So ours is a lot smaller, but perhaps that is what provides the right platform to answer the question. And that is, in our instance, in South Africa, the aerial firefighting capacity that's provided by the private sector is way more cost-effective, efficient, successful than anything that could have potentially been provided by a government or a government agency. The Air Force capacity is actually non-existent at this stage, so it's unreliable and can't be relied on. And the general economic efficiency approach of the private sector enables the effective completion of this market with a active competitive landscape associated to that. I think provides the best value for money at the end of the day for the funders of government, being the population of the country. So that's our small time perspective from the tip of Africa, is that the private sector can do a lot better job than government can do if it's insourced. However, the overarching umbrella funding capacity from government is critical to ensure a sustainable response to wildfires from an aerial firefighting point of view into the future. So that element we cannot discount, and we have to keep that as part of the industry, but the actual operation should be left to the private sector.
Well,
Carlos?
Yeah, definitely, Emile. I think this is probably the hardest question, Larry, to answer, because it brings us to a kind of a almost political and ideological discussion. It's like public or private health surveys. It's kind of I can't agree more. The big advantage of private services is that you're not married to anybody. You raise a public tender, You give the service to somebody for a couple of years. If these ones are not performing, you just get rid of them and you contract other ones. However, if you develop an in-house, in-source service, you purchase helicopters, you purchase spare parts, you train your military guys, it's going to take longer to get to the same level of performance that an industry that has been doing that for the last 50 years. But second, once you get there, you're married to your service. And you can't just get rid of the helicopters. You can't get rid of the military that aren't public servants. So it's like doctors, it's like everything else. So definitely for me, for us as an industry, it's a threat. Obviously, I would prefer that 100% of the services were granted to. I do understand that probably a model like in the US, quite mature, I would say, a reasonable mix in which a number of services, minimum number of services to guarantee a certain level of service has to be somehow guaranteed by the state. All right, like education, like health service. I'm a liberal myself, but I have to say, but I do understand that the minimum level of service should be guaranteed. However, the reality, what I have seen in the last years, is that there is a common pattern in the contracting services. At the beginning of the firefighting, aerial firefighting story of countries, when they start, Spain in the 80s, Chile in the 80s, probably in the 70s, 80s, the initial intention is to have everything in the state. And finally, 20 years later, they realize this is inefficient and they start outsourcing. Now we are seeing, Greece, for instance, or France. There are countries. Sweden. It's a pity we haven't got around with us. When politicians realize, hey, we haven't got a good firefighting system, their first idea is all the time, let's purchase helicopters and let's have our military guys, our military pilots flying there, because this is not that difficult, is it? I mean, it's dropping water. They drop bombs. I mean, it shouldn't be that difficult. And then realize 10 years later that every 10 helicopters or planes, the CL-415s in Spain, you need 10 to have 5 in operation, because it's, public procedures, budgeting, management. It's not that flexible. It's not that efficient. I mean, you've got the efficiency. It's important at the end of the day. So we trend to move forward, on a more outsourced way. So I would never say that all the services should be, I fully agree, it's much more efficient, far more efficient, but there should be certain room for, a number of aircraft, probably no more than 20%, I would say, something like that. A minimum level of service guaranteed, let's say, by the state it is, but the rest definitely. Flexibility. If you don't like this guy, after 4 years or after 3 years, you can penalize him, you can promote him, you can motivate him, paying him more by efficiency. You can design smart tenders just to promote efficiency. I mean, we've seen for years, Larry, this is one of the big problems of the call when needed models. I mean, call when needed have the problem of, you're not promoting efficiency at the end of the day. If I can extinguish a fire in a couple of hours, well, if I make 4, I will have twice as revenue, So let's make it smart. Let's try to promote efficiency, to price efficiency. And of course, let's punish the ones which are not performing. And these can't be done with state-owned resources. That's for me the main driver to design.
Not an easy topic to solve very quickly. And in fact, we've talked about a few things that will take a few years for us all to figure this out. Listen, I appreciate you, Emile, and Carlos for your time. I'm thankful to have been part of this panel. I love being surrounded people with whom we share the same mission and purpose, which is to save lives. So thank you for your time, and I will pass this on to the next panel.
Carlos, Emile, Larry, thank you for this eye-opening panel. Thank you very much. And I can't help to think it's unfortunately unsurprising to hear the aerial firefighting market, the global market, is stuck in more ways than one. in local jurisdiction administrative millefeuille, like the red tape. I'll try to get EHA and Verticon onto a future roundtable to assess if and what they're doing to change the status quo you so eloquently put forward. So stay tuned on that. And to introduce this final panel, I'm absolutely delighted to present Russel Christopher. Russ was a partner at Thora Capital, which was recently purchased by an alternative investment firm focused on transportation infrastructure called ITE. Russ is now head of helicopter origination, sourcing, disposition, and execution at ITE. Hey, hi, Russ.
Hi, Emmanuel. How are you?
I'm doing great. From this last panel, I'm thinking we need to get Doge to come and put some sense in the global aerial firefighting market.
Possibly, or some rationalization, perhaps.
Well, hey, congrats on the sale, and I'll let you introduce your speakers now.
Thank you for that generous introduction. Hi, everyone. In no particular order, I want to introduce to you James Nohilly, Vice President Fleet Management at Milestone. James has been at, hi James, he's been at Milestone for 12 years, working in financing and pricing, and more latterly in general fleet management, focusing on strategic planning for the future of the lease portfolio, and also OEM relationships. Prior to Milestone, he spent 10 years at GE Capital, mainly in Europe, it would appear. Next up, Jason Diniz. Hi. Jason Diniz, President at Ecocopters. Jason's a self-proclaimed aviation aficionado. And he started out in manufacturing and mining sectors, but joined Eagle in 2019. He's now president and heading up and spearheading strategy and growth for the company, I believe. And finally, last but not least, Diniz Beese, CEO partner at Agrarflug Heli Lift. Hi, Diniz.
Hi.
Diniz runs Agrarflug, which is an international helicopter enterprise specializing in the purchase, sale, leasing, maintenance, repair, overhaul, and conversion of helicopters on quite a significant scale. So happy to have you all here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
I'm going to go to James first. James, arguably, Milestone is probably the most mature and established helicopter lease portfolio in existence today. You've been doing it on a large scale longer than anybody else, which would lead me to think that your portfolio concentration management and balancing of risk is somewhat matured and looking largely how you would expect it to look optimally, perhaps not optimally, but as close to it as anybody else. I'd be interested to know, what percentage of your current portfolio is firefighting? Do you expect that to increase or decrease? And just speak a bit about key markets and aircraft types within that portfolio.
Sure. Thanks, Russ, and thanks for hosting the panel. Yes, as you say, Milestone is a 15-year-old company this summer. So we've been here a little while. I suppose we're quite new to the firefighting space in certain ways. We have a small portfolio, or a small number of aircraft from our portfolio active in firefighting today. It's less than 2%, but we certainly do see that growing over time. I think, everyone said that the fire market is growing. I think that's very clear by reading the newspapers, if nothing else. And we see it as being a global phenomenon. There's no particular region or country left unimpacted at this point. So we certainly see it growing. We're still learning, trying to figure out where we are in that space and how we can help support the growth of the market and support some of the operators to get a broader reach in terms of their equipment and improve the overall quality of their portfolios aligned to what their end users want.
Thanks, James. Dennis, from an MRO perspective, what sort of percentage of your business is firefighting versus other mission verticals?
Well, let's say we support the firefighting market quite a lot since the last 20 years, I would say. And our engagement is about 65% firefighting market, mainly Europe, but of course we are also focused on some, let's say, South American or even North American little aspects. But that's where we are. And of course, it was very interesting to listen to the previous panels, because at the end of the day, although we are, let's say, more focusing on MRO or leasing business, we are sharing the same problems and concerns the operators have right now. So let's say money or cash in principle is a big issue. Everything is becoming more and more expensive, and we do not see the prices being paid or the turnovers increasing as much as our costs are increasing on the other side. So I think this is a big concern right now in this firefighting sector. Prices just remain the same, but everything else is becoming hell of expensive in these days.
Thanks, Diniz. Jason, I'm hearing this in this mission vertical or sector is that costs are going up, revenue isn't. That's kind of the way of the world often. But what do you think is driving that?
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for having us, being part of this panel here. Look, I think there's multiple levers causing an imbalance in the market today, but that's always been the case. If you go back historically, there's usually a cyclical rotation every 6 to 8 years. Today I think some of the key drivers we're looking at is a real squeeze on the supply chain side to support operations. There's a lack of parts. There's a lack of availability. There's high demand on the same token. So when you put those two together, the economics, quite frankly, don't make sense. The other pieces I would say is inflation costs. When you think about what's happening in the world post-COVID, and you're looking at the inflation going up at the rate it is, as Diniz mentioned, the revenue rates are not, quite frankly, keeping up to these inflationary cost impacts that are not just impacting helicopters, but it's impacting the overall operation of our customers. So, when you put these two together, I think they're the two biggest drivers right now.
Thanks. Also, my understanding of this market is that there has been in the last handful of years, there's been an increase in operators moving into the space. So there's kind of increased competition. Do you think that's driving down pricing on the services? Do you think that's a component?
Absolutely. In fact, Russ, we've seen this before. When you have a positive feel in the market, and you have more investors coming in and more operators moving in, maybe switching mission profiles to firefighting, what we see is sometimes a price war between operators, and that doesn't help the market when the costs are higher, and then they're trying to compete to get into these longer term contracts, or at least stay positioned to get there. And when that happens, it's a real risk factor, because all it takes is for the season not to be as heavy in terms of hours, not resulting in them not making the revenues that they're planning to make, and that has an intrinsic impact on their cash flows. So I'm not in the shoes of the operators, so I can't comment on why that's happening, and sometimes at a regular basis. But the reality is that is definitely a problem.
I think because Marcelo mentioned earlier on that he believed that consolidation could be a likely outcome going forwards. I think that would probably help with that, and is probably necessary from where I'm sitting. And Diniz, what are the sort of common aircraft types in this space that come through your? Because I imagine you have a very good overview of what people are using for this sector. What are the types?
Let's say our company portfolio is focused on Bell medium helicopters, so we try to support turnkey solutions on the Bell medium side. This is where we're in, but of course we see especially in Europe, we see 3 different types of helicopters. We see the A-Stars, we see the Bell Mediums, and then we see the heavy lifters like Super Pumas and formerly the Karmovs as well. So as of today, we do not see big restricted category helicopters coming into Europe, which, let's say, from my personal perspective, is of course positive, because we like to protect our current assets somehow. But of course, let's say in an increasing firefighting problem, like with new fires, which we see in Germany, which we see in Sweden, which we see in Norway, maybe we need additional capacities in future as well, because even the OEMs can't produce helicopters in a number which might be needed. And with our increasing, let's say, EASA and local civil aviation conflicts, we are not really increasing the time to get helicopters mission ready. So this is a big pushback as well. And I think, Carlos mentioned it before, that we need to somehow see at least Europe, but better worldwide strategies, and not only local advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, I can see that. Thank you, James. I don't know how close you are to the kind of underwriting component of the Milestone operations, but I just wanted to talk about, the aircraft as a firefighting configuration compared to other verticals, and the impact of that on residual value and remarketability and liquidity overall of a firefighting aircraft. Presumably, you've been involved in having to transition aircraft to firefighting, or firefighting aircraft to some other vertical. How have you navigated that? How has that been?
Yeah, I think we have been involved in transitioning assets. We've launched a project, for example, with Helitac in Australia to design a tank for the S92, which we converted one of our own older units to a firefighting unit last year, and put that to work in Canada with an operator there. To test the market a little bit and see how the 92 would perform. So we've seen quite a bit of that space. I would say that I see the market, I suppose, slightly bifurcating. I think this was a theme throughout some of the earlier panels, in that there's kind of the pure water bombing aircraft, and then more of a multi-mission re-roll aircraft. And I think those specs are very different. A pure water bombing aircraft is anything with a hook and a bucket, and not much else potentially. Although obviously you can get more specialized, or a tank, exactly. Whereas when you get into the multi-role space, some of the standard category aircraft, particularly with people carrying capabilities, winching, fast ropes, different EOIR cameras, different elements that can now be involved. And as Carlos mentioned, the more search and rescue style aircraft, almost it gets quite complex. So I think we differentiate between those. We don't see firefighting configuration as being materially detrimental to the residual value, but of what is ultimately at that point a utility helicopter. I think there is some questions around stresses that might be put on an airframe, depending on the airframe itself. But ultimately, from what we've seen, the residual value of firefighting helicopters holds up well. What I think is the greatest challenge for underwriting for residual value, and for leasing generally into this space, is the standardization and the ability to move assets across border and across operator. And I think obviously Dennis and Jason as well, to be fair, both businesses have been very successful in creating particular fleets of aircraft in the Bell Medium and the Eagle Single, that have gained acceptance within the market and are used across multiple operators. But that's not always the case, particularly when you get up into the larger aircraft. It tends to be a more limited user base of an individual aircraft, and then national restrictions or single regulated restrictions on movement of aircraft. So that's where it's more of a challenge underwriting firefighting assets, I would say.
Mm. Yeah, I would agree with that. And then that, not only that, but also just to speak a little bit about the sort of the economic or the contractual model. Whoever wants to speak to this, there's day rates, there's hour rates, there's yearly contracts, there's seasonal contracts, there's these exclusive use contracts. There's not a universal approach to how the customer wants to contract the operator, it seems, either. I've had conversations with senior lenders about this aspect of the deals and the challenges that they have with that. Who would like to speak to that?
Look, I'll probably make a couple of comments here. At the end of the day, James, Dennis, and myself are more focused on supplying aircraft to our customers, i.e., the operators. What we've seen here at Eagle is it depends on the operator. It depends on their model as to what type of contract would be best suited for their operation. If you've got mature operators who are focused on utility segments that cover a wide range of mission profiles, where you can use the aircraft during the season firefighting, off-season utility, and other multiple applications, and it makes sense for them to potentially choose a contract, where other operators are really focused on firefighting only, probably want to go more like exclusive use contracts where there's a guarantee or a period of a year. So I think that varies, Russ, in terms of the operator, in terms of their setup. We're seeing a mixed bag, quite frankly. But more recently, I would like to add that we are seeing contracts that are extending past a year. In some cases, 2 to 4 years, just because these state agencies around the world, mainly in Southern Europe and the US, are looking to have more access to assets, given what's happening with the intensity of the fires, as well as the seasonal timeline of these fires. So they're willing to take the risk to drive in longer-term contracts, just ensure they have the assets. So this is slightly a changing angle that's going on, which benefits the operators and, quite frankly, us as lessors too.
Yeah, thanks. And Fred, earlier on, Fred referred to the green element, or probably more specifically called ESG, environmental, social, and governance. There, some investors are trying to apportion capital allocation to ESG strategies. I imagine to meet certain quotas, and senior lenders have also intimated a difference in ultimate margin or debt rate for ESG projects. Have any of you, James, possibly, have you experienced any improvements in debt pricing due to ESG strategy in the practical world?
Dennis, do you want to jump in there, or I'm happy to?
Or anybody.
For us, we're internally funded through our sister company, but I think the company has spent a lot of time working on ESG initiatives and has issued some ESG linked debt instruments. So there has been a differentiator there. I would say more on the supply side than in pricing. It's not material at this point, but I think it is something that certain investors are interested in, and as such, it can definitely be a help, I would imagine, for people raising debt directly in the market.
Yeah, thanks. Dennis, do your investors or stakeholders overall like the firefighting segment? Do you find it's easier to attract investment or stakeholders to this mission vertical over any other?
Well, at the end of the day, we are just local funded or investing our own capital, so we are just a little fish anyway. But yeah, it is getting more and more difficult, of course, talking to, let's say, national or even international banks when they see, okay, this is a year of manufacturers, 1996 or whatever, 15-year, 20-year-old aircraft. So it's more easy, I would say, nowadays to gain 15 million euros for one new asset instead of 3 million euros for a 20-year-old asset. So it's always a big, let's say, path of education to push the financiers into the right direction and try to teach them that the value of the asset does not really depreciate and thanks to the regular price increases of the OEMs even increase somehow in terms of parting out opportunities or stuff like this. So that said, it is a challenge indeed, but it is manageable as long as you are not looking for, let's say, 300 million of new funds to invest into new 20-year-old helicopters. My personal perspective as of today.
Yeah.
Maybe Milestone has, let's say, other accesses, but
they have access. Jason, you're a more privately funded organization, aren't you? I imagine you're sort of caught between working with older equipment, which is less capital intensive and trying to generate a cash on cash return, versus newer equipment where you need senior debt to lever the deal. And when you do need the senior debt, like, the short-term nature or the seasonal nature of contracts, and the perhaps less liquid aircraft types or older aircraft, it becomes challenging. Presumably you're in the weeds on that on a regular basis, trying to raise debt.
Yeah, look, exactly. We're in the same situation as Diniz. We are privately funded. The O'Reilly Holco family, basically they own everything about Eagle. We're 100% owned by Mike and the family. But when I say, in terms of the funding, the reality is the approach. Our approach is really focused on Bell mediums. I would say based on the capital value of these Bell medium aircraft in the market today, and based on the longer term play that we take in our business, that is not an issue today. Of course, now if you're thinking about putting a 412 EPX at $15 million in the market, it becomes a completely different ballgame. And quite frankly, it doesn't make sense. Just because the longevity on those contracts are not there, number one. Who knows what the residual value will be on those aircraft 5 and 10 years from today. And that is not our space. That's more what James and the big fish are playing in. But from our perspective, there is demand on used mediums or used single and twin engine aircraft. It makes sense for us for what we're seeing in the market. And on the ESG side, let me add, with helicopters, there's a huge component of reusing parts and components. There's a huge piece of rebuilding components to 0 hours or using parts with hours that are certified that have an intrinsic positive uptick to the ESG side, because you're not putting in more energy to create new parts, et cetera, et cetera. So in our business, especially Diniz, Agrarflug and Eagle do, have been really, you could say, focused on ESG for decades now. Because the reality of the reusability of helicopters, which makes sense. So I just want to add to that piece.
Thanks, Jason. That's useful. All right. Well, I'd like to thank each of you for your time.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Russel. Thanks, guys.
Diniz, James, Jason, Russ, thank you very much. And thank you to all our speakers, moderators. The next Heli Market Trends Live will be mid-July, focused on EMS market. Thanks for joining. See you next time.